You're listening to the Kingdom Project Podcast. These are discussions on biblical theology and interpretation. The emphasis is on context and grace. The goal is to promote biblical literacy by displacing and debunking most modern interpretations. The challenge is to engage in healthy conversation that may stretch but sharpen iron. This is the Kingdom Project, and I'm your host, Marcus Hall. Well, hello everybody. What is going on? I hope you're doing well. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for downloading, streaming, subscribing, and reviewing, and all that stuff that you do. Here we are in, what is this, episode 8 of the primer on Revelation in a first century interpretation. This would be known as preterism. Of course, you have partial preterism and you have full preterism. Partial sees everything up to 19 or 20 chapters, those chapters fulfilled, and the last couple chapters unfulfilled. Full preterism sees the whole book as fulfilled in a first century fulfillment, therefore saying that the whole Bible is fulfilled. And trying to decide where I'm going to go when I get to those. I believe there's enough biblical evidence to show that that has been fulfilled. What does that mean? If you're working through this and you're sort of just wondering and you're having problems with that, what does it mean? Does it mean that's it? No, of course not. There's way more to it. We evangelize, we spread the gospel, we love, we learn, we study, we equip, we do all those things to live a Christian life, growing in maturity and sanctification and our closeness with the Lord, and learning theology and proper hermeneutics, the interpretation of the Bible, and to know the doctrines of the Bible well. Is there anything in the future that could happen? Yeah. I mean, good things and bad things. Does the world keep going? Seems like it does to me. However, does that mean God would never intervene again? Well, if 1,000 years has gone by and the world has just gone really, really bad, what's going to stop God from intervening with humanity again to remind them and bring back His word? I can't say that. I can't say. Now, RC would say all the coming references in the New Testament all pointed to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, but I believe in a final coming. However, the Bible doesn't speak of one. So if he could say that and not get beat down by his group of people, I feel okay in doing that. However, people locally have called me some names, and that's okay. I can deal with that. No big deal. So, yeah, we're working our way through this. So anyway, thanks for the comments. Thanks for the emails. People leaving good comments, people asking questions, contacting on Instagram, email, YouTube, those locally contacting me directly, personally, and things like that. Thank you. A lot of fun. A lot of fun having theology. It's even fun when you're friends with somebody and they say, "This has inspired me to study because I want to prove you wrong." Awesome. I love it. That's no offense taken. And they said that, no offense taken either. I said, no, absolutely not. That's the point. Study. Don't take my word for it. Go study the Bible. Awesome. That means you're going to actually you want to get in there and study. That's what I did. That's what others have done. And ended up here. You may end up somewhere else. I'm not saying 100%. This is correct. I could be wrong. I have no problem changing my beliefs mid-air during a dispensational premillennial rapture. Okay, so also I want to say thanks for those who are financially supporting the podcast. That is much appreciated as well. And if anyone feels the need to do that, it's always in the link of the description of the episode where you can send money to PayPal. This is a listener-supported podcast. I make no money off of it. Yeah, thank you. Now, this episode here, we will be dealing with some enemies of the early church, the first century Christian church. All right, now God told the 7 churches at the beginning, the 7 churches in which this was written to, he told them that relief from tribulation, from the persecution that was coming from the apostate Jews would be coming soon. Okay, now he had this edict, or decree of judgment that was made manifest in the opening of the 7-sealed scroll. And then that God sent forth warnings to Jerusalem in that the forms of the 7 trumpets. I don't know why I can't ever say that word right. Trumpets. I mean, I can't say it in a sentence though. So then he would soon follow this with the pouring out of his wrath from 7 bowls. Okay, now this is the 3 series of events of the 3 sevens. Okay, now before John goes to write about the wrath from the 7 bowls, that happens in chapter 16. He first identifies these 3 major enemies that the church is dealing with, and this is chapters 12 through 14. Okay, now the three prominent enemies of the saints are identified in chapters 12, 13, and 14. Okay, there is Satan. There is the Roman Empire. Now, when I say the Roman Empire, I'm going to use this generically, almost, as a whole. Okay, the Roman Empire is an enemy, but more specifically, it will be Nero. Okay, and then the third is the Jewish priesthood. Okay, so in the preparation of the pouring out of the wrath, this pause is taken to identify these enemies who would be working together to destroy the early church. Now, those first 2 are obvious in this point of view in preterism, Satan and Rome. Now, again, we can always speculate whether or not Satan is the actual Satan that we all think of, or just adversary. There's always that. We're just going to go with Satan here and the Roman Empire, but it's the third enemy that usually has a lot of disagreement and things like that. So I'm going to identify the third enemy as the Jewish priesthood, because that just seems relevant and it seems to go. We'll get into it though, okay, as we move on. But first, we're going to deal with Satan. Okay, so chapter 12 of Revelation. Okay, there's this introduction of a woman who's giving birth to a child. Okay, let's just go there for a moment. Let me pull that up. And I don't know how many of you follow along in the chaos of social media and the doomsdayers and end timers, but September 23rd of, I think it was 2017. This alignment in the stars was supposed to happen. Everybody said this was going to be the beginning, and nothing happened. And of course it wasn't going to happen because I was looking at this as first century. Now, let me tell you something real fast here. I used to think, my views changed because I used to think this was an account going back to the birth of Jesus. Now, You could say that, however, there's some other things, though, that will change that. So, Revelation 12 says, "And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it." So I'm thinking, this is Mary. She's giving birth to Jesus. Satan is using Herod because he sends out the decree to kill all of these newborn children, right? Male children. And then it says she gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations. This is speaking of Jesus here. He's going to rule all nations with a rod of iron, but her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled. Now, here's the point. The woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Okay, so then it goes on to say, "Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." Now, here's a good point here to make, just on a side note. If Satan was an angel who rebelled and he took 1/3 of the angels with him, because it says a tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven. This is happening in the 1st century. Now, and then it says the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil, the deceiver of the whole world. Now, it just, I'm just making that point. Okay, so in chapter 12, there's this introduction. Okay, so we have to notice the description of the red dragon, all right? He's a red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head. Now, John clearly identified who the red dragon was, because he goes on and says, "The serpent of old who is called the devil and Satan." Now, later, John also would also identify the second enemy, Rome, by a similar description, okay? 7 heads, 10 horns, 10 diadems. The devil and Rome are so united, or you could say the adversary and Rome. The Rome becomes this adversary because they're so full of sin and rebellion that they're united in the purpose to work together, that the two enemies could be described almost synonymously or interchangeably. Okay, so this description reveals the alliance between the two, or the force of it. Okay, so we also have a fractional number again, limiting the power of what the red dragon could do, right? When it said his tail swept 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Now, fractions describe increments and small steps. This war against Jerusalem is happening in increments. It happened over time. Okay, so we've mentioned that a lot. So now Satan acted in 2 realms here. First, he appears in heaven, and then he's cast out of heaven to the earth. And on the earth, he is unable to destroy the child of the woman. This is in 13 and 14. It says, "And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness. Again, the wilderness, it was mentioned earlier, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and a half a time. Okay, so he's unable to destroy the child of the woman. After this failure, he would go off to make war with the rest of her children. This is in verse 17. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who kept the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus, and he stood on the sand of the sea. Now, let's just attack Satan in heaven first, okay? We have Satan in heaven first. Okay. Now the text first presented him on earth, ready to kill the child to be born, and then it's revealed later that chronologically he appeared first in heaven, and then he was thrown down to earth. Right? Gets a little confusing. So it's curious that Satan was in heaven, but God was on a throne as a judge, all right? In the Bible, we can see there's some sort of courtroom setting, divine counsel thing going on. In the Old Testament, Satan was pleading in a case before God. He's bringing accusations against the saints of the Lord. In verse 10, is it? Yeah, I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers have been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God." Now, this could be the law. I'm not gonna get crazy on this on here. This is a primer, but we know the law accuses. It brings about more sin, and if that's the case, the law could be the accuser of the brethren. And this is the end of the old covenant, because a new covenant has been established. So it could be the law. Now, say all the law was up there and then thrown down, and it's a red dragon. I know it's a stretch, but there's some interesting teachings on that if you want to look into it. Yeah, I would say, but I think the law, or it could be double meaning. I'm not for sure, but I definitely know that the law accuses, and it could be an accuser of the brethren. Okay, now, but of course he's in heaven, and that's not really an issue. I think it would be an issue today. However, it's not an issue as far as the Old Testament. Look at Job and all that. Of course, there's arguments on that not being Satan and things like that too, but it is what it is, okay? Just to be simple, I'm going with that. Now, we go back here. There's this woman on earth who's about to give birth to a child. All right, so the woman, like I said, I would think it was Mary, is giving birth to Jesus. But in the fuller context of the story here, it could be a reference to the faithful Jews who believed in Jesus and who gave birth to the church. Because we have to remember, it first consisted of Jews who believed in Jesus, and then later included the Gentiles. Okay, so when James addressed the early church, he called them the 12 tribes in James 1:1. So the description of the woman can also be recall the elect Jews of the Old Covenant. The 12 stars on her crown, 12 tribes of Israel. And the context of Revelation is the destruction of Jerusalem. So Jesus had already been born. What's the point of actually telling that here? The person of Mary as being persecuted by the devil is not a prominent theme in church history. And just like the woman in the text, the Jewish church in Jerusalem did flee the city into the wilderness. That's why I was pointing out wilderness being said twice there. And Jesus prophesied this in Matthew 24, warning them of the coming destruction, right? Flee, just to flee, for then there will be great tribulation and all those things. Let's see. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which is spoken of through the Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Right. All right. So the first century, the church that's been established at Pentecost at this time. Okay. They were told to flee. So another reason to interpret the child then as the church is that number, 1,260 days that appears again here. And this was the time period of the destruction of Jerusalem. It's 3.5 years. So the devil's told in verse 12, he's only has a short time. Rome's going to destroy Jerusalem. The Jewish Christians had a short time to escape. And in addition to those reasons, in verse 17, it spoke about the rest of this woman's children. When it says she became the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring. So, this rest, they keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So it doesn't really sound like Mary and her family here. Okay. The rest of the children probably refer to the Gentiles that were grafted into the first century church and thereon after. And they could be those not presently in Jerusalem, but the Gentiles who were converted to Christ, in all the lands. So, Satan was turning his attention to them. Or possibly Judaism, the law, a mixture of it all, was turning its attention to all of them. So, anyway, he loses. All right. God delivers the woman and the church and all of its children. The two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness, all right, for that times and a half a time. And I already read that, okay? Now, Old Testament Israel in Exodus 19:4 was carried on the wings of eagles as she escaped from Egypt into the wilderness. And it says, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. So there's this promises from God, okay? His grace to all of his people who grow weary, all right? He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases power, as Isaiah says in Isaiah 40:30 and 31. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired, and they will walk and not become weary. That's on my grandpa's gravestone, actually. So, and we need to know, too, at this time, the book of Daniel refers to the times and a half a time, which is a year, 2 years and a half a year, which is 3.5 years, and which is the time for the destruction of Israel. Okay, so here we just all of this stuff's going on, and it all makes sense. God was going to be with his people during this time, and now in verse 16 it says, "But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth." So, back to Exodus, the sea opened its mouth to gush forth water and killing the Egyptian soldiers. And now here in Revelation, the earth opens its mouth to drink up the water of the serpent. so that the woman and her children may be saved and flee. So also the earth drank up the water of the great flood after Noah, and his family was saved. So always notice how the Old Testament's the source for understanding the book of Revelation. So this brings us then to the second enemy here, the Roman Empire. And this was the beast from the sea. And he is generally recognized as the prominent beast in Revelation. But there's also a beast of the land. Okay, so the number of the beast is 666. It's not 666, it's 666. This beast in Revelation is, it's been it's been so many people. The Reformation, during the Reformation, they said it was the Pope, it was Hitler, Ronald Reagan was identified as the beast one time because he had 6 letters in each of his 3 names, Ronald Wilson Reagan. So, but here's the deal. The sea beast is the Roman Empire, and then more specifically, the beast is the Caesar of Rome, the Caesar Nero. We'll get to that in a moment. But notice the source of power of the sea beast is from Satan. This is in 13, chapter 13, verse 1, and it says, "And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like bears, and its mouth were like a lion's mouth, and to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority." Okay, so we find the dragon had stood at the sand, right? The sand of the seashore. That's how, just moving around here on my note. At the end of chapter 12, it says, he stood on the sand of the sea. And then it goes to the sea beast, okay, and he's given it its authority. So, the sea beast worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, okay, so it's under this control. Okay, so there's all these other hints, though, here in chapter 13 as to who the sea beast was. So, he came from the sea. Now, geography is important here. Rome is across the Mediterranean Sea from Jerusalem. When Paul went to Rome, he went by a ship crossing the Mediterranean. So the quickest route to Jerusalem from Rome was by sea. Okay, so this is natural here to identify the sea beast as Rome. And it had the 10 horns, 7 heads, and the 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. Okay, so the dragon had similar descriptions, so there was an alliance here. So John identified these 7 heads later in chapter 17, 9, and 10, where it says, "Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. He must remain a little while." Now, the 7 mountains here are significant because they signify the city of Rome, because Rome was known as the city of 7 hills. And a city with 7 mountains or hills surrounding it, okay? And each hill had a particular name. Also, history tells us that Nero was the emperor during 64 and 68 AD, which is during the time John was writing this, I believe, and the names of Rome and Nero are, they're synonymous, okay? It's like the president in Washington, D.C., okay? So, or the United States. So the two names are the same, okay? The name Nero was synonymous with the city of Rome or the Roman Empire. So, sometimes talking about the beast, you could refer, that's why I said generically and then specifically Nero, okay? Because sometimes it could be Rome, other times it's Nero. So let's deal with Nero for a moment, and maybe we'll get to him again. I think, yeah, we will. Dealing with the number and all that, the mark of the beast. Now, Nero was the 6th emperor of Rome. And the first 5 we have Julius, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius. So Nero followed, and so he's the 6th one in order. So John speaks of the 7 kings. He says 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. Okay, so I named the first 5 who are dead. The one who is should be identified as Nero. Now, the 7th emperor was Galba, and he reigned for 7 months from June 68 to January 69, which is a very short time. After that, there was a civil war, and there were 4 emperors that ruled in just 1 year. So that's what John says, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. I believe that's a reference to Galba. Now, in chapter 17, verse 11, it says, the beast, which was and is not, is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. Okay, so the number 8 is symbolic of starting over. Okay, so the 8th day was the day of circumcision. The life of a covenant child in Israel actually began a second time as an official covenant child, okay? 8 souls, Noah and his family, started a new life. The 8th day of the week starts a new week. After the civil war in Rome, a new stable king, the 8th king, would come in the power and reign, okay? So this would initiate new life for the Roman Empire. Because Rome almost perished during this time, okay? So it had its own troubles. So just thinking of 4 emperors in just 1 year, that should give you an idea of the turmoil that's going on. Excuse me. It would be like having 4 presidents in 1 year here in the States, okay? So, but after that, once the 8th really actually comes, order would be restored. So in a symbolic sense, following the Civil War, the 8th king ruled. Rome started over again. There was stabilization that came, and it came back as a vibrant kingdom after almost nearly collapsing and dying. Okay, so Nero's death and the Rome Civil War is symbolized again in Revelation 13:3 when it says, I saw one of his heads as if he had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. Now, a lot of people today and futurists say there will be this false Messiah that comes. Somebody will try to assassinate him, and after 3 days he will heal. Because it's going to, be the false example of Jesus, okay? And that's where they get this from. So, you got to think, after the death of Nero, Rome, it's on the verge of collapse. And like I said, after a short time, it's revived and order is restored. So, this seems to correspond with John's description of the fatal wound that would be healed, okay? So, I believe the details of John's description, they match so well with the city of Rome and with Nero himself. Nero's nickname was the Beast, okay? So Rome was the center of the Roman Empire. John's descriptions matched the history of the emperors in those days, in the first century, and the readers in the Seventh Church would have understood this clearly. Okay, they would have identified the beast from the sea as a reference to Nero himself, and also because Nero was nothing less than a beast in his own right. Like I said, it was his nickname. He was the embodiment of evil. He murdered his own mother, his brother. He murdered his wife. He would tie slaves to stakes, dress himself in the skin of wild animals. That's why they called him a beast. And then he would attack them and molest them. He had Christians killed in the Colosseum by animals. And this may be, one reason why John describes the beast as one who was like a leopard, and his feet was like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. Now, all this talk of beast and everything, you can go back to Daniel 7, where he has Daniel's vision of the four beasts. Okay, again, Old Testament references. There's that. I won't read all of that. I'm just putting that in there for you so you'll know. So, but the leopard, the bear, the lion, these were animals that were used to put Christians to death in a Colosseum. All right. Now, also, the Roman emperor claimed to be God on earth. They would burn incense to the emperor. He thought of himself as God, so therefore he's guilty of blasphemy. So this is used to describe the Roman Caesar in chapter 13. So there was a reason for the blasphemous names on his horns. Okay, Rome and her emperors had set themselves up on earth in the place of the true living God. Also, the coin. Nero's coin, it's some inscription about him being God on it as well. Okay, now we also have another reference then. It's in verse 10. It says, if anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Nero had become the enemy of his own people. He was actually a target of assassination. And at the end of his life, his capture by his enemies was imminent. And instead of being dragged through the streets and being slain by everybody, he actually committed suicide. So he died by intentionally falling on his own sword, okay? So he lived by the sword, he died by the sword. He died at a young age. He was only 32 years old. And I have watched secular documentaries on Nero, and they point things out like he claimed to be God. He killed they talk about that, obviously, but they also talk about his nickname being the Beast. And, they're secular documentaries, so they make no reference to the book of Revelation. So, but we also, again, in verse 5, there's a reference to the period of 42 months. Okay, this is April 67 to August 70. Okay, and during this time period, the Romans attacked Jerusalem, and their mouths were full of the arrogant words and blasphemies. Okay, because it says there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months. Was given to him. It's Revelation 13:5. So, the sea beast was the Roman Empire, especially as the empire was identified with Nero himself. And this is the second enemy of the church. Okay. Now, after John spoke of the sea beast, he introduces the land beast. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. This land beast made those under its control worship the sea beast, because it says he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth or land and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. So, the land beast induced the people to worship the sea beast, which is Rome or Nero, by performing great signs, deceiving men, and making an image of the sea beast for the purpose of worship. So the land beast led others to worship the sea beast. Those who did not worship the sea beast would be killed. And he also put a mark on the right hand and on the forehead of those who worshipped the sea beast. Okay, so those without this mark and who did not worship Rome or the Roman emperor would be economically punished, because it says, and he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell, referring to the marketplace, except for the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of the beast, the dreaded mark of the beast. So, usually in any society where persecution is happening, one of the first acts of this persecution is for people to suffer economically. They will lose their jobs, they lose their businesses, because ultimately that is their life, okay? This is their livelihood. So the writer to the Hebrews mentions this as he describes some of those in the early church when he said, "But remember the former days when after being enlightened, you endured a great conflict of suffering, partly by being made a public spectacle through reproaches and tribulations, and partly by becoming sharers with those who were so treated." For you showed sympathy to the prisoners and accepted joyfully the seizure of your property, knowing that you have for yourselves a better possession and a lasting one. That's Hebrews chapter 10, 32 through 34. So, who's the land beast? Who caused the people of the land, Israel, to worship Caesar rather than Jesus? Right? An evil beast, but looks like a lamb, has two horns. Two horns instead of 10. That implies he had less power than the sea beast, but he exercised all the authority of the first beast in his presence. So, which means he acted under the authority of the Roman Empire. So, maybe the Bible gives us an answer. Okay, this is important. So, John, the Gospel of John, chapter 19, 12 and 15, okay? Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now, it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So they cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." The Jewish crowd was a pawn in the hands of the chief priest. Okay, John in this text is saying the Jews were being led by the chief priest, and we see that the chief priests were inducing the people to worship Caesar. Caesar was their king. They taught that he alone was worthy of worship, and they loved Caesar. They hated Jesus. They wanted to see Christ dead. And then Matthew 26:59, it says, "Now the chief priest and the whole council kept trying to obtain false testimony against Jesus so that they might put him to death." Okay, so the chief priest of the Jews were the religious leaders who looked like lambs, but they led the people to worship Nero. Revelation 13:15, "And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed." So out of this dedication to the sea beast and all that he spoke, the land beast would kill Christians as a religious expression of his faith. All right? This is exactly what happened to believers as predicted by Jesus when he said, "They will make you outcasts from the synagogue, but an hour is coming for everyone who kills you to think that he is offering a service to God. These things they will do because they have not known the Father or me. But these things I have spoken to you, so that when their hour comes, you may remember that I told you of them. These things I did not say to you at the beginning because I was with you." It's John 16, 2-4. So the chief priest who served Rome hated the church. They hated Christians, along with the scribes and the Pharisees, and they were not from across the sea. They're from the land of Israel, and they dwelled there in Jerusalem. The priesthood of Israel was the land beast, thus the third enemy of the church. Okay? So this worshipful attitude of the Jewish leadership toward Caesar is found in the book of Acts. Okay, a Jewish mob gathered to bring Paul and Silas and others before the city authorities. The charge was that they all act contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus. Okay, so this worship then by the Jewish leaders continued until the destruction of Jerusalem. The religious leaders of the Old Covenant Jews were teaching that the Caesar was king rather than Jesus. They become apostate. They were leading people to worship Rome, the sea beast, rather than Jesus Christ, because they had rejected him and the gospel. Okay, so they had given their life to worship of Rome. They enabled Rome to actually kill the Christians, because in Revelation 13:16 it says, "And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the beast to be killed." Okay, so this beast from the land was known for its great powers as well. He performed great signs, so that he even made fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. It says, "And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of his signs, which it was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life." So John later called the land beast the false prophet. This is in chapter 16, verse 13, and he says, "And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs." So, again, speaking of the final end of both the sea beast and the land beast, John interchanges the identity of the land beast with the false prophet. And in Revelation 19:20, John describes the final end of both the land and the sea beast, but he identifies the land beast with the false prophet, okay? And this would be, "And the beast, Nero, was seized, and with him the false prophet, the Jewish priesthood, who performed the signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire, which burns with brimstone." Okay, so the land beast was also the false prophet. So what were these miraculous powers of the Jewish priesthood, okay, that would lead people into idolatry? Well, it's a common characteristic of false religion or false religious leaders down through the whole ages, okay? So it's no less true for the Jewish priesthood. False prophets can perform miracles. You just think of the sorcerers of Pharaoh, think of the Christian hypocrites. There's no doubt there were no doubt similar to those of of whom Jesus warns when he said, "Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I would declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness." Okay, and in that text, it's talking about false prophets. So the Lamb Beast was the false prophet. Probably the high priest of Israel, who led the people to worship in the synagogue of Satan, which was the temple in Jerusalem. So the leaders of the priesthood, they were all in alliance with Rome, and they would use that alliance to put Jesus to death, and then they derived their right to exercise power from Rome, and yet Jesus was a threat to that power. Therefore, the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council and were saying, "What are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." That's in John chapter 11, 47 and 48. So there's a great amount of evidence that the Lamb Beast is easily identified with the Jewish priesthood. Now, I think at that point I will just you know what? I could probably just go ahead and run over on this episode. But you know what? I'm going to close it right there, and then there'll be just a short episode on the Mark of the Beast, because that will be good clickbait for people just to want to know. Futurists will be like, "Oh, Mark of the Beast," and then they're going to hear a first century interpretation of that. So there is most of that. The three enemies of the early church. All right, the sea beast and the land beast, and we will do the Mark of the Beast next, and then we will have the 7 bowls of wrath to talk about. So I hope that gives you some good information to go further on there. All right, we got Satan, possibly the law, but we have the Roman Empire, which in turn shows to be Nero and the emperor, and the land beast is the Jewish priesthood. All right, there you go. We are making our way through Revelation. If there's any questions, comments, disagreements, you can leave a comment or send me an email at thekingdomprojectpodcast@gmail.com. And as always, until next time, be a mustard seed, be leaven. Thanks for listening.